tender, hot and spicy, with a steamy look. It was passed on down by my mother sweet. She told me, honey, this will be a real good treat, to turn a man's heart into a buttercream. Well, you cook a dish that makes him want jump and scream. So come into my kitchen,
Come into my kitchen.
come on down to my kitchen.
Come on down to my kitchen.
I said, come into my kitchen.
Come into my kitchen.
Come on down to my kitchen.
Come on down to my kitchen.
Won't you come into my kitchen and I will feed you fine. Well, I got the tools to make a culinary
Let's do this.
score. And when you eat my cooking.
So now dumpling filling. I think it's more of an art than a science. Sometimes it's what you have around, and other times there's a kind of more traditional things. So in Chinese cooking, there's something called the Chinese flavor base, and there's 3 parts to the Chinese flavor base, and we're going to use that in our dumpling filling. One part of the flavor base is scallions, and so we'll have some scallions. Another part of our flavor base is ginger, fresh ginger. You can get that right at the grocery store. And garlic is the 3rd part of the flavor base. Some people might argue that soy sauce is also one of those. However, these 3 aromatics are what's in just about all Chinese cooking. So let's get these ready. And so for the scallions, I'm going to use the whole scallion. And just so you'll know, the green part of the scallion is the mildest, and then the strongest flavored part of the scallion is the white. But we're going to use them all. And I'm just going to cut this into some, not bite-sized, but maybe half-inch pieces in preparation for mixing that in to our dough, into our filling. And we're going to put some fresh garlic in there. This is one of the great uses for the cleaver, is just taking the side of that blade and just smashing that to get the paper off. There we go. And we'll just take that, smush that, and fresh ginger. I love ginger. And what I've done is I've cut it so that the grain is really short. And I just take that and smash that. Just like that. And then we'll take one more. There we go. So there's our flavoring. And the filling that we're going to use is a mixture of pork and shrimp. And that's pretty classic. The flavor of the shrimp is slightly sweet. Some folks will put in some wine in that just to sweeten it up. So I'm going to use some Chinese wine, just a teaspoon or so. This is Shaoxing cooking wine, which is a sweet wine. So just maybe a teaspoon or so of that. And to that, we will add, I'm going to go with about an equal amount of ground pork. And you could use ground pork, you could use beef, you could use chicken, turkey, whatever you like. So we could just kind of chop this all together, which would be great fun. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to play with one of my toys here that I like, and this is a chopper. So I'm going to put in like half of this, not to overload it. There we go. And we'll just put this here and that has basically turned it into dumpling filling pretty quickly.
And then I'm going to make some more filling, which is pretty much the same filling that Chris just made, with slight differences. And so I've got some ground pork, just like he did, ginger, scallion. I also have some Chinese cabbage or Napa cabbage, and I'm going to add in some cabbage into this. And in fact, I don't need this much because I'm probably not going to make this whole pound's worth, and I've got some shrimp here too. So let me take this and just kind of loosely chop. Normally I would, your filling's in there. So I'm going to go ahead and manually chop this into little bits. I was going to use Chris's little special hand pull machine, but it's filled with dumpling dough, so we'll just do the manual thing here. And basically I'm going to chop this up pretty fine because in the dumpling dough I want small little bits so that it's not, especially with these stem ends, you don't want a big giant piece of stem stuck in your dumpling dough because it's just going to puncture your dough. Okay. Let's just get this thing chopped up. So for this cabbage, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to salt it lightly and then let it sit for a little bit. It's going to bleed out some of the water and weep, as they say, right? So we want to get rid of some of that liquid. And it's kind of a funny thing because what you're going to see in a moment is once I get my dumpling mixed together, I'm going to actually add a little bit of water and stir it back in. And so some people ask me, well, why am I getting rid of the water out of my cabbage if you're just going to add the water right back in again? And the key is I don't want the water in the cabbage, I want it in the mix. And if you don't get it out of the cabbage first, what ends up happening is it comes out while it cooks, and then it actually breaks up the meatball inside your dumpling. Right, so this way it kind of gets incorporated a little bit better. Alright, so there's that. And we do actually need to probably set that aside and then salt it. In the meantime, I'm going to start chopping these up. We must have salt around here somewhere, right?
Yeah, I'll get it. You can edit me out.
Yeah, so we'll find some salt. Anyway, let me chop up these scallions. Also, I'm also, like Chris, using the green and the white parts. This was, I think, 3 or 4 scallions. These are pretty skinny little scallions, and so I use a couple more than I might normally. And then, I don't remember, Chris, did you peel your ginger, or did you just go ahead and smack it?
I just smacked it.
You just smacked it. And so I think you don't have to peel your ginger, but I think it's one of those things where some families, because if your mom or your grandmother did, then you do. And if your mother or your grandmother didn't, then you don't. I do. Easiest way to peel this is don't use a knife, just get a spoon. And then all you really have to do is hold the spoon like a paring knife and scrape. And what you'll see is, let's push this so I can scrape this onto the counter. The scraping will simply take the skin off very easily, and you don't really lose that much of the ginger, right? But much easier to deal with than a knife. Okay, and then I like ginger, and in fact, in my dumplings, I don't mind if I bite into a little chunk of ginger and get a bit of a ginger flavor, boost on a bite. So I don't worry too much about really finely mashing this up. So I will usually cut this into thin little strips, right? And line these up, julienne it, and then I'm gonna turn it 90 degrees and do a fine mince. But I'm not gonna necessarily smack it, and I don't have a cleaver at home, so I guess maybe that's part of why I don't do it that way, but I also don't mind getting a bit of chunk of ginger in there. So that's really up to you and your taste. If the ginger, you like the flavor, but you don't want to kind of bite into it and get a bit of the heat, I guess. If you describe it's not quite spicy hot, but there is definitely some intensity there to the ginger, right? All right, so there's those. Let me get some of this salt. Does this unscrew, or does it pop? Oh, it pops off. Ooh, look at that. We'll hold some of that salt because I'll probably need it later. All right, so let me just kind of salt that, let that go. It'll start to weep. In the meantime, I'm going to add the rest of this stuff to the bowl. So here we've got our ginger, scallions, and then I also need to take some of the shrimp, and I'm going to give it a rough chop also. I prefer the shrimp to be rather chunky and not too finely ground, because I also like kind of a chunk of shrimp meat as opposed to having it completely ground into a paste where you really can't taste it as an individual ingredient, so to speak. So that's probably enough right there. So add that to the bowl. And probably should have opened this before. There we go. And I'm going to not use all of this either. Probably about half of this. So that's about I guess that's about a half a pound of pork. And then, like Chris will add a little bit of Shaoxing wine. Maybe a teaspoon and a half. Some just regular light soy. And if you're not familiar with sometimes those who don't do a lot of Asian cooking, you may see recipes that say light soy, and you're running around the store looking for something that says light soy, and you're not going to find it. You may find sodium reduced or reduced sodium. Terrible stuff. Regular old plain, just straightforward soy sauce, like this Kikkoman soy sauce, probably the most ubiquitous brand in the United States. That's what we call light soy sauce. There's another version of soy sauce that is much darker and often used more for color. Do we have some over here? Maybe not. Anyway, and that's it's used in a lot of dishes, but it's also often more for color than it is for anything else. So I'm gonna mix this stuff up. I'll probably give up in a moment with these chopsticks and just go to my hands. And this is gonna get mixed together. Another thing you're gonna see in some recipes is they're gonna ask you to stir the meat in one direction. If you go in two directions, it won't unwind your dough, but the idea is that you do want to stir this around because the proteins in the meat, as you continue to work them, will start to break down and kind of align, and what this ends up doing is it helps to create a firmer texture at the end. So most of you who might be accustomed to making kind of an Italian style meatball, and you've seen recipes that say don't overwork the meat, we're working the meat here. Because most Italian meatball recipes are trying to get a more delicate meatball, and we're trying to get something that holds together inside of a dumpling. So I'm literally going to do this, get it going, and this really does then end up making this a little bit pastier, you can see. It's still going, I'm going to let that go. But I'm going to add, I'm just going to add in maybe about 1/4 cup of water. And that also, you can do, if you want a little bit kind of richer flavor, you could just use some chicken broth or something like that. You can see once I mix this in, and I'm just using my fingers to do this, the water's all gone, but it is mixed together. And the last thing I'll do right before we actually start folding the dumplings is to take this, once it's sat for a little while with the salt on it, squeeze it out to get rid of as much of the water as I can, and then just stir it in. And that'll be my dumpling mix. So very similar, and I think some of this hand mixing you see me do here, again, same thing. 20 seconds, 15 seconds in Chris's little machine is probably equal to me working this for a minute or two, just because I can't move my hands that fast. And that, this will get that same action going. So you get the same kind of thing out of the machine that we get here. There we go. So there's my dumpling mix ready to go. My dough will be ready pretty soon. And then we're going to get to some folding, and we'll look at a couple different folding techniques, and we're also going to look at a couple different cooking techniques.
To my kitchen.
Come on down to my kitchen.
Won't you come into my kitchen?
Come into my kitchen.
Come on down to my kitchen.
Come on down to my kitchen.
Won't you come into my kitchen? And